Welcome to the One Gang Worldwide podcast, your ultimate ride into the world of motorcycles. Visit cyclesworldwide.com where we offer a completely free marketplace for everything motorcycles. Join our One Gang community where you can connect, share info, and swap stories with riders from all over the world. Join for free at cyclesworldwide.com and be a part of the One Gang community right now. On today's episode of the One Gang Worldwide podcast, we're riding along with Justin Mooch Deloretto, a figure well known in the motorcycle world for his dynamic involvement as a club president and his influential role in community outreach programs. In this episode, Mooch will share his journey through the world of motorcycles, the significance of club culture, and his deep commitment to making a positive impact through various social initiatives. Whether you're interested in the Brotherhood of Biking or the power of community outreach, this episode's for you. Let's get the engine started and dive in with Justin Mooch Deloretto right here on the One Gang podcast.
This club's been around since like the 50s, and so, or maybe it was the 60s, but either way, they've been around a long time, and they were a super old school chopper club. So I was really able to learn like the actual history of motorcycle clubs, all the real life protocol, but like the old school values and morals and stuff came from them. And so I really just jumped into that after meeting those guys.
Yeah. Today on the One Gang Worldwide podcast, we've got Justin Deloretto. We are excited to have you, man. We're really looking forward to this. We appreciate your time. And let's have some fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, man. I'm excited to hang out with you guys.
What's up, Justin? Good to have you on, brother. All right, I guess we'll start it off from the beginning, man. You grew up in Oregon. Tell us a little bit what kind of a dude you were growing up, what you were involved in, the things that interested you at a young age. And if there's a moment you remember specifically growing up where kind of motorcycles clicked in your mind and you figured out, man, this is pretty badass.
Yeah, I grew up as an identical twin, man. So, I always had my twin brother with me everywhere we went. Obviously a little bit of a troublemaker. If you read my book, you probably read some of those stories, but more just because we were looking for something to do. But middle-class family in a nice, middle-class neighborhood. We were that, I grew up in that era where we got out from school and we were either playing sports or riding bikes. We were always outside doing stuff. Not a lot of video games. So we were always really active kids. But yeah, we were really into riding bicycles. And, even before that, I remember those like 3-wheeler things. I remember, riding around on those as much as we could.
Big wheels.
And then really getting
into
big
wheels, man.
Yeah, big wheel.
Right. Where you fly, lock up your feet and just skid everywhere.
Man. Power slide.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, and that was awesome.
Cool.
So we did quite a bit of that. And then I got into bicycles and rode up. And then my stepdad built us a go-kart when we were like, I don't know, we were probably 10 or 11. And we used to go and race that thing everywhere. We really got into like 4-wheelers and stuff like that. So we were always kind of riding something and always racing and chasing each other, always.
Nice.
That's awesome. Did your go-kart have a cage on it or was it just flat?
Yeah, it was just flat. And he had some some warehouse property, and the neighbor next door, they had like a flagpole. So it had this big circle around it, so it was actually made it for a really sick lap. So we just go out there and smash around that thing all day long.
Heck yeah.
Who was crazier, you or your brother?
My brother was probably more accident prone, I think. I think he was getting stitches a lot more than I was back then. But he's probably a little bit crazier. He rides a little bit harder. I hope he doesn't hear that, but but yeah.
That's cool. So we mentioned it briefly before we started, but I was curious if you could go in. So you played with a band, The Escape, for a little bit and had a couple of opportunities to play with Warped Tour. Could you go into a little bit about that and then tell us why you moved on from it?
Yeah, so I've been playing music since probably the 7th grade. Same thing. My stepdad had played a guitar and he taught me how to play guitar. And some of my buddies were starting to like try and get bands together. And me and my twin brother started a band in the 7th grade. We were called the Flying Seamen. It was
yes.
SAAMEN. So it was like a guy with wings on it was our logo. And our school actually really supported it. They let us play at like the pep rallies and stuff, which was funny because we were like a grungy punk. I mean, we didn't even know what we were doing yet.
Right.
And then in high school, I was in a band. And when I moved up to Portland from Salem, I started working at the Hot Topic. That was like my first.
Yes.
That was your house. And
that's a throwback, man.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, honestly, for a young kid, it was a sweet job. It was a lot of fun. But I met some other guys there that played music, and we ended up starting a band. And if anything from my story, I think you guys probably noticed when I do something, I'm all in. So we started this band, and we decided, this is what we're going to do. And we spent 5 years touring. We did be on the road like 2 months out of 2 months on, 1 month off. Sometimes it'd be
Yeah.
1 month on, a month, but we toured nonstop for 5 years. This was kind of pre-internet, so if you wanted to get your band out there, you
Wow.
had to just go out there and play. And
Go and do
Great
it.
you know,
tour.
Yeah.
sure you guys remember the days of just hand making flyers and putting them up on poles, and
Yeah.
just that whole you'd have a street team that go out there and promote you in other cities and stuff. So we spent from 2000 to 2005 just on the road touring, and thankfully we got to play some Warped Tour dates. We played at CBGB's in New York City. We played at the Gilman Street
Wow.
in the Bay Area. So we got to play a lot of really cool places, and it was a really good time.
Who was some of the bands influenced you at a young age that you followed or maybe kind of gravitated when you guys were doing your own music towards that
Good
type of a
question.
sound?
Yeah, I was super into Boston bands like Ducky Boys and Bruisers, and then some of the early hardcore stuff like Gnostic Front. So I was super into that, but then we started getting into still, I guess, still kind of that Boston influence, like the Unseen
Yeah.
was one of the bands that I was really into that we were kind of trying to sound like, but we kind of had this weird like crossover of street punk slash hardcore. So
Mhm.
I think that's cool now, but I think at the time people were like, oh, we were too hardcore for the punk rock kids and too punk rock for the hardcore kids. We don't really like fit the genre.
Yeah.
Um, but I was into like a lot of street punk and oi and stuff like that. So it's a lot of old school bands, and then at the time there was a lot of newer ones coming up. So it was just being able to play with the bands that we listened to was probably the coolest part.
That's
Any cool
cool.
any cool stories from the from the Warp Tour as far as some of the bands that you got a chance to meet and hang out with?
Man, you always hear like you don't want to meet your heroes, and
That's
Yeah.
it.
yeah, as a kid looking up to all those big bands, man, Rancid was always my all time favorite band, and
Oh yeah.
I can't believe I finally got to meet them, and Lars from Rancid was actually going to produce and put out our album. And the more we spent time with them, dude, they weren't people I would usually chill with, to be honest.
Yeah.
And nothing super negative. They just wasn't my type of people. But I was, as a kid growing up, I was like, these got to be the coolest guys ever. And
Starstruck. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't really think they were. But dudes like Bad Religion and some of those older bands, those guys were awesome, man. Greg Hetson and some of those dudes. So there was pros and cons to it for sure. Jerry Only from the Misfits, everyone always says like how rude and mean he is. He was awesome to us when we met him. Harley Flanagan from Cro-Mags was super cool with that. Like we played with his band when he was in Harley's War, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's a dick. Don't talk to him," and stay away from him. We ended up couldn't find our drummer who was like 19 at the time. And we'd go look for him in the van, and he's in our van smoking weed with Harley, and I was like, "Hell yeah, this guy's awesome."
These guys are cool, man, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey,
So all that type of stuff was my favorite part, man. Just building those relationships
For
and
sure.
getting to meet people. And a lot of the guys I met on the road, like the other bands we toured with, are still my friends to this day that I still stay in touch with. And half the reason I have social media to stay in touch with guys like that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome, man.
That's the real reason for social media. That's cool, man. That's wild.
Why did you guys end up separate? Why did you guys end up breaking up?
There's probably a few things to it. I mean, I was around 25 years old, 25, 26 years old. I was starting to get into riding motorcycles quite a bit. So this whole time we were doing this, we were living off $5 a day, which back then you could
Yeah.
actually eat off of. I mean, good luck doing that now. But it was
Yeah.
one of those like if we were on tour, we had some money, but if we didn't have a lot of money at home, so I was managing a porn store. Um, which, was all fun and games for early, being in your early 20s, but I knew it wasn't like something I was able to do long term. I was going through I was definitely going through some mental health stuff, and starting to think that, like people liked our band for us, but they didn't think our music was good, but that's just because how I felt. And then, we're a bunch of young kids. We lived together, plus toured together. We were all starting to hate each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, as people get older, some of the guys were going back to school, guys were getting relationships, and we couldn't keep up the same pace we were doing.
Gotcha.
So it just felt like time to call it quits.
You said
Interesting.
that your
Go ahead,
music, you felt like you're, saying that the music wasn't good. They just want to hang out for you for who you were. Did you not enjoy your own music, or are you just meaning like you're self-conscious, not thinking that you were very good?
Yeah, I think it was more self-conscious. I definitely enjoyed it. I wrote a
Okay.
lot of the songs, and we had like a lot of Blood for Blood influence and stuff. Like I said, that our singer and stuff was in the street punk, and I was more into hardcore. So I liked the blend of stuff we did. I always liked writing new music. Um, looking back, I wish we would have focused on our recordings a little bit better. But you know how it is when you're a kid, man. We were just happy to be in there and record
Right.
and have fun. Um, so no, I think it was part of the mental health stuff. That was right around the time that I attempted suicide and stuff like that. So I just had a lot of negative stuff going on, I think, and it was one of those things where it was time to move on.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, for sure. So coming from a hardworking, traditional Italian family, man, you got music behind you. You're still a young guy at this point in time. Obviously, you're battling some demons. Um, what was your interest in getting into this motorcycle club life? I mean, it's totally a complete spin from what you were doing to now all of a sudden you got this interest level to join a club and start riding with these guys. Take us into that a little bit.
Yeah, it was and it wasn't. So, in that band world, and I'm sure you guys will read that story in my book or read it, that I started kind of having some drama with, like, there's a lot of gangs that come with the band world, and I don't think a lot of people recognize that. But there's, hardcore gangs from the hardcore music scene and stuff like that. And I was in an anti-racist skinhead gang, and we were having beef with some of these crews, which is another reason we stopped touring as well. It was a small part of it, but that was part of it too. One of those things that led up to it. Um, and so I think honestly it was somewhat of a progression. Like I was getting out of the street gang life and kind of getting into motorcycle clubs, and I could see the motorcycle clubs was equally as structured as street gang life. One big difference is like the gang I grew up in, they were disciplined by violence. So if you ever got in trouble, if you were late or something like that, you were always in the backyard getting beat up. Which
Right.
as a kid you think, hey, if that's what's happening, that's what everybody's doing. That's normal, right? And it's definitely not normal. That's not okay. So
Sure.
hanging
Yeah.
around motorcycle clubs, one of the first clubs I was hanging around called the Outsiders. They had a rule that they said there's nothing two brothers can't sit down and talk about. There's no reason brothers should fight each other. And so that really resonated with me and hit, like really hit home with me. And so I really started spending a lot of time with them. And I think the benefit to that too is that this club's been around since like the 50s. And so,
Right.
or maybe it was the 60s, but either way, they've been around a long time. And they were a
Mhm.
super old school chopper club. So I was really able to learn like the actual history and, of motorcycle clubs, all the real life protocol, but like the old school values and morals and stuff came from them. And so I really just jumped into that after meeting those guys.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that you always pointed out was going back was the fact that the older guys they had their chain of commands, right? It's just like the army and everything else, as far as rules, and everybody follows the chain of commands. Where kind of like the newer stuff's a little bit more rebellious, right? Who the craziest seems to win instead of following the rules. So that makes a lot of sense, man.
Yeah, they were really, really structured, and I was actually really shocked to see because my game was really structured too, but it was a big kind of paradigm shift to see these people being this structured without the threat of violence. Like, they could lead as because they were good leaders versus, they'll tell you what to do because if you didn't, they were going to punch you in the face.
Right.
Yeah. So how did you rise? What aspects of your personality and that fitting into the group dynamic? What what aspects do you think really contributed to your rise in position at such an
You know,
early age?
Yeah, and I think, looking back, I think I was always somewhat of a leader, and I don't mean to say that like in a cocky way, but like,
Yeah.
I'm very outgoing and outspoken. I try to, be a man of my word and, tend to stick to the morals and values. And a lot of times the people I'm with share the same morals and values. So I think we're normally in agreement. I think maybe I'm just the louder mouth sometimes. Um,
Right on.
or just think, the guy willing to do the work. I think the big difference is that, nowadays a lot of people want a title, but, most of the time when we were doing it or when I was doing it, no one wanted the title. It wasn't like I wanted to be in leadership. It was just, I was the one putting in the work or the one doing it. And,
Yeah.
like around the Outsiders, I was just to hang around and prospect for a little bit around the Vagos as a regular member. I didn't become into leadership until I joined the Mongols. And honestly, it was because I started the Mongols in Oregon and there was only 6 of us when we started. And, they were like, well, hey, you put in all the work to get this chapter here. You might as well be the boss. So it wasn't like hey, this guy's destined to be a leader or anything like that. I was there
Yeah.
essentially. I was there and I was
Yeah.
willing to do it. And, and then as it went on, I kept learning more and I feel like that helped a huge amount too. But at the point there, and early on, it was just kind of like, hey, man, I was there and I was willing to do the job.
Yeah.
That
So
seems like a really common thread. The more people you talk to that rose to leadership, they didn't want it. It's essentially they got pushed into it without a real choice.
Yeah, and without getting too far down that rabbit hole, I definitely, I've seen a lot of times it doesn't work, and a lot of times it's because those people want a title. And there was
Yeah.
times where, a lot of times throughout the club in the Mongols, where I was a regular member or different positions, or I'd let, especially in Oregon, I'd want other people to give it a shot because then, what's the risk? Someone else trying it. If it doesn't work out, we could switch. Um, and what I noticed is the people that wanted the title or wanted the position were never good at the job because they don't understand the work that went with it.
Yeah.
And they didn't want the work. They just wanted the clout
They
that
want the
came with the
glory.
title.
Yeah.
But anyone that recognizes the amount of work it comes in to do any of those positions in leadership normally doesn't
Don't
want to
want
do it.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're normally the best man for the job. That's why they end up getting it.
Right.
What kind of adjustments did you have to make? I mean, coming from being more prospecting in the other clubs, and now all of a sudden getting to be the president. Like, what was it? What were the? Because you were still young. How old were you at this point?
Yeah, I was like 26, 27
Yeah,
years
man,
old, man. And
you're still a young dude. Because most of these guys are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s,
Mhm.
right?
yeah, definitely for the Oregon biker scene, absolutely. And I think that was one of the reasons I moved on from that scene is, I was enamored by this outlaw culture and it's, biker culture. And these guys were really cool guys, but, always say no disrespect, but I keep saying it over and over. But I looked around the room one time and same thing, man, there were a bunch of older guys, we weren't in the same things. I remember thinking, "Man, if it wasn't for this club, I don't have anything in common with these guys, like, these aren't
Right.
dudes I would invite over or go kick it with." And so I really started being in search for that, and that's when I found the Vagos. They had a lot of younger guys, a lot of guys from the punk rock scene. So without knowing anything about politics or how clubs are run, I was like, "Oh, this is the club for me." And
Right.
the Vagos for me at the time was a very fun club. Like there was a lot of parties and girls and a lot of rides. And I think the big shift, to answer your question more directly, is I think that big shift is when I joined the Mongols, it was a much more serious club. And I had to kind of learn that very quickly. So, I went from wanting to be in a motorcycle club because I wanted to ride bikes and party, to being in a very structured kind of militant club that was essentially at war with everybody. So it got real dangerous real quick, but it got real serious. And so the kind of goofing around and messing around stuff kind of went out the window pretty quick.
Gotcha. So you had at 26, you got this high level and high stress position as the club president. In addition to now you got to watch your back a lot more, is what you're saying, because there's a
Yeah.
lot more wars out there. So what was your, like, as the leader of the group that you had in Oregon, like, what were your responsibilities in regard to, like, protecting you and the guys on a consistent basis? Like, how did you base your days, your plans, just to make sure you guys weren't put in the wrong position where you were outnumbered or somebody was doing something stupid?
Yeah, the biggest thing, so, at that time, that was when, the FBI had come to me or to my parents' house and said there was a hit out on me. All the local clubs in the state said they weren't gonna let us be there. A group of all the chapter Ps from all the local clubs or chapter presidents have been pulled over and caught with guns and ammunition in their trunks, and they're out looking for me and my brother. So, I mean, we definitely could have just hid, right, and tried to wait
Right.
it out. There was 6 of us at the time, and I wanted us to last, and I wanted to make sure if we were doing this, it was meaningful, and so we were actually very visible all the time, but we had to be very, very our intent had to be specific, right? Like, we had to know what we were doing, where we were going. I'd have people there earlier, a lot of the really militant aspects of stuff. But the way I always put things is the way we presented ourselves was more important than anything because if we looked like we had our stuff together or looked like our security is on point, less people are going to want to challenge that. And any of these enemies that wanted to come at us, we're going to say, oh, this isn't going to be easy. This isn't going to be a cakewalk. And so I put in a lot of effort into doing stuff like that, like going out there and showing them, if you want to change your lifestyle, this is what we're going to do. And I think a big part of it is those clubs in Oregon who are all very legit, real deal clubs, and I have a lot of respect for all of them. But they put in a lot of work back then, but they hadn't had beef with anybody in years.
Right.
So when we started up there, I kind of wanted to point out to some people that this isn't like a plan to meet up or oh, we're going to go to bike nights. Like this is something could happen any day, anytime. And if you guys really want to have this beef, it's going to change some people's lifestyles.
Yeah.
So things like that. I know that's kind of vague, but things like that helped a lot and played a big role for sure.
And you were always the guy who kind of would like to settle the stuff down. You weren't necessarily, I mean, you had your hothead moments, but for the most part, you always try to keep clean, and you never wanted to leave, come into a place thinking you're this badass or anything. You were always very respectful. Was there a lot of challenges on your end when it came to that, where, like, you had the guys in your crew that were kind of trying to do a little bit more than needed, and you had to kind of settle people down, just say, "Hey, man, this isn't us. We're just." You got
Absolutely.
any
I think the
stories like
big
that?
Well, the big part was just, because that club's so structured, I think people listen to leadership, thankfully. So yeah, we would get the new guy that would join or the guy that want to prove himself and want to go above and beyond, but he wouldn't think about the long-term consequences.
Right.
And, I always like in Oregon now, thankfully, because nothing ever rose to violence, where all the clubs get along now, and had we gone out and done something stupid, who knows where that would be. And I think we all know the history of those clubs where that's happened and, that they still don't get along. And so thinking big picture was a big part. And I think that mindset helped me when I sat down with all these clubs and had meetings with these clubs. I didn't sit down there with like an air of arrogance or threat violence. I
Right.
really wanted to coexist with everybody and kind of make everyone feel appeased at the end of the day, like they all walked away with something or that everyone had a win. And so it was kind of a lot of strategy but also a lot of patience for sure.
Diplomat. That's cool. So I'm curious, at what point did you decide that that lifestyle wasn't for you anymore? And can you take us through the process of what that looked like? I mean, I'm sure there was some pushback from members.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a pretty tumultuous time. It was only 2 years ago or so. Our national president had just got thrown out of the club. At the time, people were saying he was a rat or an informant. He isn't, but at the time, that's what they were saying, and I didn't know either at the time, you know? Um, and then there started being this big, kind of power vacuum and people jockeying for position,
Yeah,
and, um probably as a younger person, I wouldn't have minded it, but where I was at in my life and stuff, it was just added stress and I think I was kind of already starting to be over it, and so that really put a bad taste in my mouth, and, I'd put in a lot of work for that club for 15 years, and I don't mean illegal work, but I mean help expanding the club,
Sure.
starting the
Sure.
sport clubs. I'd done a lot of positive things for that club, um, and some of the people that were taking over in leadership, I don't think respected that or recognized that, and I just didn't feel like I was a part of it as much as I used to. I kind of felt like I was half in, and I know that's a dangerous place to be. And at that time, we had moved into the Midwest. Relationship changed with a lot of clubs I used to be really good friends with, and
hmm,
was kind of putting me in danger to an extent. And so I think, and then one of my close brothers was killed at the Lake of the Ozarks, and so I think there was just so much going on. It was all negative that it kind of, just kind of pushed me to this was going to be the time. This probably isn't for me anymore. I think I realized that politically there was a chance I was going to get pushed out. A lot of people were asking me to run for national president. I had no interest in doing it, but I did have a lot of support, and I could tell that that was kind of a underlying issue. Um, and so initially I retired in good standings, and there wasn't a ton of pushback outside of obviously my local guys didn't want that to happen. A lot of the
sure.
guys like in Southern Illinois and St. Louis and stuff, they didn't know Mongols outside of me until I got them to join the club. There wasn't Mongols here until I moved out here. So a lot of them that had been around a little bit longer had built some relationships, but most of them knew me, so me leaving, bummed some people out, and the Southern Illinois chapter decided that I mean, this is the very simplest version, but the Southern Illinois chapter decided that if I wasn't gonna be here, they didn't wanna be in either, and so they asked for a leave of absence. One of them was actually had just gotten arrested, and part of his stipulation was he couldn't affiliate with the club. His blood brother was in the club, his coworker, one of the
Wow.
guys from our jiu-jitsu team. So the overlap was so tight,
Wow.
um, that we decided, maybe they could take a leave and take a step back. And the club decided they couldn't leave unless they did. They were out in bad standings, so they were. So they told me that I was still in good standings. I was retired in good standings, but they told me if I continue to associate with this group, that I would be out bad too. And these guys essentially left because of me. And I wasn't going to say no just to save my status.
It's
So I was
tough.
just very open. Yeah, I was very open up front right away. I just said, hey, I appreciate the rules. I respect the rules. I know what I signed up for. So I was happy to take the designation. I guess happy is not the right word, but you know what I mean? I knew it
Yeah,
was
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. Got out
And so
safely.
then my status was changed out bad. And then, yeah, then it wasn't, no one was out like the message that was sent out that was like, hey, there's no ill will. Mooch has moved on with his life. But that also means that no one's able to contact me and I'm not allowed to have contact with the club anymore. So that's where it started getting kind of being difficult or being a bummer.
Justin,
sure.
quick question on this end, and this is just for my own curiosity. Like when you left the club, and you obviously you called it retired or whatever, but do the other clubs that you guys have beef with, do they know that you're gone too? Because I mean, obviously they've known you and who you are as far as the club leader in Oregon, but when you left, were you still getting like did you ever run into places where people kind of didn't know that you were still out or anything like that ever happened?
I think a lot of people heard pretty quickly that I was out. I did a lot of the sit downs with all the major clubs. So, a lot of people knew I was no longer in leadership. The club I left kind of did me dirty in the fact that they kind of had blamed some things on me with some of those clubs. Like, so they told them,
Scapegoat.
hey, yeah, but he want to do this, move into that area, whatever. But so they knew that way too. And then the guys that I was close with, I reached out to and let know. I think the difference is some clubs had said, okay, now that he's no longer in, I don't have beef with him because the beef wasn't with me personally, it's with the
Right.
club. And some didn't choose that option. So it's just kind of a mixed bag with that one, and depending on who thinks things were personal and
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thanks for answering that, man. Hey,
Yeah.
so you left the club. Take us to this point of your life. Well, what are you doing now? You're transitioning from a 1% club. And how did you get into the social work part of your life in this journey that you're on now? Can you kind of take us through when you left and what was going through your head? What were your goals and what plan did you have going forward? And how did you get?
Yeah, so I actually started school back in 2009. So I was still actively involved in the club. I was just going in and out of jail a lot, and I was decided I needed to do something. I needed to get on some sort of path, right? Like I knew I was a felon with head and face tattoos. I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And everything
Right.
kept coming back to school. So I initially had gone back to school to be a drug and alcohol counselor. There was a member of the Mongols, Richie Rich. He's got his PhD in clinical psychology, and kept thinking, well, hey, if this guy can do it, the guy is super well spoken, but well respected, covered in tattoos. And so I was like, well, trying to find a job where I could do with tattoos and stuff. And so
Right.
started with drug and alcohol counseling. I did that went to school for that for 2 years, fell in love with psychology. And I ended up, my first college I went to was Whittier College. So I moved to Los Angeles. So I was like still in the heart of the Mongols, hanging out all the time, like where they were from pretty much, that area. Um, and then moved back to Oregon and finished my bachelor's degree, and then ended up going to school for my master's degree in social work and finishing that. So I was still active in the club at those times. And in fact, so the last year of my social work, I had to do all my internships. And one of my internships, and I couldn't do it because I was a Mongol. And so I had sued the state and won,
Wow.
but I was all over in the papers, right? The Mongol leader sues the
Oh, yeah, yeah,
state,
yeah,
and
yeah.
now he's a social worker. And so I was kind of concerned about finding a job. Um, at this point, I've been in the club for 10 years. I was getting really, really heavy into jujitsu, into school. I was kind of less focused on club life. And initially, that was my plan for moving to Illinois is, my wife was going to go to school here, went to school out here for her master's degree. I was going to come out here and do jujitsu and start looking for work. And there was no Mongols out here. So my intentions initially was to come out here and kind of settle down.
Right.
Um, but our national P, I'd asked to retire then, and our national P said, hey, there's no reason to retire. Just show up to things you want to. There's no Mongols in that area. And then me being me, wasn't here long and started kicking off chapters and pissing people off and started a lot of chapters in the Midwest. And so I think that like 4 years later is when I'm finally retiring. So I think I'd come out here with that mindset that I was going to go back to focusing more on work and jujitsu and more healthier stuff. And then I kind of got roped back into it until I
Mhm.
got pushed back out. And um, so I think that played a big role in everything too. I think had I been allowed to retire in good standings that second time, who knows? I think I would have had one foot in and one foot out. So the outback designation kind of shoved me out, but I really think that's what I needed to move forward and do what I'm doing now.
Boy, how happy must your mom and dad been when when you would go through your schooling and get the hell out of there, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, they've always supported what I do, but they definitely were happier when I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
doing
man.
club stuff.
I know Italian families, they're so close. So like that is so important, man. That's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, my mom testified on my behalf at one of my trials. I mean, my family's all school teachers and sports coaches and, as square as they come when it comes to law abiding stuff, but you know how they're supportive. They're my parents,
Yeah.
so they always backed me and supported me.
And
Yeah.
your brother left also the same time you did?
Yeah, he actually retired a little bit, like a few months before me for way different reasons. I mean, he owns his own business. He's got 2 kids. He's married. His business was having some issues, and he was working like 7 days a week, and he just really couldn't put into it what he used to.
Right.
So he actually retired before me. And his everything he did was, I mean, obviously as my brother, if I was out there with him, he backed and supported me. But when I got really involved in the political stuff and kind of was going down that road, he was not involved in that whatsoever and didn't. We kind of went our separate paths when it came to that. We had both ended up retired, but his wasn't like a political stance or anything like that.
So in your book, The Ride of My Life, you talk about the community and the camaraderie within the club. And I'm curious if that kind of dynamic extended out to your new journey past the club and in retirement, how that's come in to play with what you're doing currently.
Yeah, I think I was very grateful in the fact that, like I said, when I left, a group of guys left with me. So I never had that. And a lot of people I know that left club life, they'll message me and say, they miss hanging out with their brothers and riding with their brothers. And I maintained that. So I was very grateful in that aspect. But also with martial arts and jujitsu and stuff, I have like that camaraderie there. And the team here
Yeah.
has really played a role, as family to me, essentially. So essentially I was putting this one brotherhood behind, but I still had it in a positive replacement. So I think I've been grateful in that. I had that kind of stuff set up so that I didn't just leave and come out to nothing. And then,
Yeah.
the world of social work or anything that people do for a living, if you're in a career for a long time, you're pretty tied into coworkers and seminars and stuff like that too. So lots of different varying levels. But thankfully, I kind of had set that stuff up so that I still stayed active and busy and still felt like a part of things.
Yeah. BJJ is probably the perfect thing to go into after the club as far as withdrawal symptoms psychologically from the club.
Absolutely.
That's a brotherhood. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That
it
worked
helped. I
out
mean,
well.
that's helped me through so many different things. I mean, we could probably go on for that forever. But that's also one of the reasons I moved to Illinois is the Pedagog Submission Fighting team. I'd met the guys when I was training in Los Angeles, and they all were kicking my ass. And I was like, man, these kids are good. I want to hang with these guys. Um, and that was right
Cool.
around the time that I had sued the state, and my wife was getting ready to go to school and for dietetics and nutrition, and they had a master's degree program out here in Southern Illinois, and so everything kind of lined up. But the jujitsu team is really what pushed us to move out here, and why we're still here.
Yeah, it's cool. So, working with at-risk adolescents, I mean, obviously it has to be rewarding and challenging on the same time because on one hand, you rebelled like they rebelled, right? And then on the other hand, you have now life experiences that you've gone through to turn your life around and go into a better direction to try to help others. Maybe take us into like the toughest challenge you've had or something a good story you can tell us maybe with somebody that you kind of latched on to. Maybe they were like a tough person to kind of get to know, because they were constantly fighting and all this stuff. You have any good stories like that that you can share, man? I know you don't have to say names, but if anything you can do, that'd be awesome to hear.
Yeah, honestly, so I work with kids that they're at-risk youth. They're presenting with at-risk behaviors that would potentially put them at risk for getting kicked out of their home, school, or community. So they, risking being in jail or probation. So all of them are on parole probation for the most part, or have pending charges. And so you can imagine that there's always certain thing that comes with dealing with kids like that, right? And I
Yeah,
think
man.
the benefit is, part of being a therapist or social work is we don't self-disclose. I don't share where I come from, but I think you can read it, right? Right? You can look at me, the way I carry myself, the way I look. And so, any of those hard cases, they haven't ever been that hard for me. So a lot of the times, even if the youth push back at first, and then they can resonate and they know, hey, he knows what I'm talking about, or he knows what it's like, or he knows where I'm coming from. And the culture out here in the Midwest is a lot different. But some things are always going to be the same. And, when it comes to family dynamics and dealing with law enforcement and being in the system, that stuff's always the same. And I think
Right.
those things play a big role to help me get along with these kids and, help make an impact.
Do you have any specific stories that kind of stand out in your mind that maybe somebody that you who was maybe a little bit harder to tame? Let's say tame. I don't know if tame's the right word, but and then after you got a chance to you have something cool like that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, no specific ones as far as they're almost all the same in the fact that
Are
they
they?
start out very challenging to get that and to get that rapport that you're talking about, really get on the same page. There's always pushback. I mean, these are teenagers. No matter if they
Right.
think I'm cool or not, they still don't want to listen, right?
Right.
Um, and so just spending all that time with them and the work we do is very intensive. I meet them in their home 2 to 4 times a week. So they're not coming to the office. They're not sitting on my couch telling me what's going on.
That's
I'm going to
cool.
their house. Yeah, and I'm going to their house, and we're really finding what the root of the problem is. So it's not talk therapy; it's called multisystemic therapy. I primarily work with the caregivers. I don't work with the kiddos as much, um, because as you can imagine, a lot of it comes down to parenting. And I think
Right.
when you were asking earlier about frustration, that's where the frustration comes in. Is I could see this kid making positive changes, but if the parents aren't making the changes, aren't
Oh
doing the,
man.
aren't
Yeah.
taking the tools that we're giving them, that's a challenge. But what's really cool with the social work that we do is unlike most social services where you come into the home, they're doing stuff for the families. They get pretty much used to the system and they need assistance from the system. Well, what we do is we go in and we teach them how to do the stuff on their own. So I don't go in there and make phone calls for them. I don't tell, I can tell them where to look or tell them how to look something up to go look for these services, but we don't do it for them. So that when we
Yeah.
leave, they have the tools that they need to continue, to be successful. So I think to me, that's been the really rewarding positive stuff is they aren't reliant on me or anybody else once we leave.
Awesome.
That's such a better approach. And you're teaching them to fish. And I'm curious with going into the home, do you feel like you gain a much better insight as opposed to having them on site in the office?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if the kid came into my office, I don't know what that family dynamic's like. I
For
don't know
sure.
what's going on home, how the siblings treat each other, how the parents
Yeah.
act.
Yeah.
Chaos in the home for a lot of them, is some of it. I get to see what the neighborhood's like, which plays a huge role, that environmental factor. So I
Yeah.
get to kind of see the whole ecology, and that helps out a lot more for sure.
Yeah. Are you finding a lot of single parent homes as well? Broken
Yeah,
families and everything? Yeah.
primarily it's been single parents for sure, and I think a lot of the research will show that too. But yeah, out here it's a lot of lower income single families or single
Yeah.
parent family.
It's
Uh,
scary, man. In addition to everybody's so addicted to social media and screen sucking all day long, so it doesn't really help with being outside, being active, playing sports like we grew up, right? And most of these kids are kind of stuck listening to this negative that just fills their mind all day long. So it's got to be an extremely tough job that you do on a day-to-day basis, man. So
Yeah,
hats
going
off.
back to what we were saying about how we grew up, I just don't see that ever even happening again, right? Everything's
No.
changed so much. So
yeah.
instead, it's how do we help them be successful in their current environments instead of trying to change stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, parents will even get in trouble if they let their kid play by themselves in their backyard these days. Like, are you
Yeah,
kidding
man,
me?
such a fine line of kids needing supervision, but still,
We live in strange
the balance
times.
the balance of keeping the kids safe, but also making sure that they have some autonomy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so speaking of the teenagers and the kids that are at risk or going through tough things, your own story is one of resilience and transformation, and you can't self-disclose with those kids, but you've got an opportunity here. So what, for kids or really anybody going through difficulty and trying to either get out of a tough spot or just make improvements to their life, what advice have you really latched onto with what you're doing to give to them?
Yeah, man, being in search of supports is a big part, right? Like having people around you that you can talk to, that you trust. I know we've all been in those moments where you feel like there's nobody there, but there's always somebody, and I think that's a huge part that
Mm.
from adulthood I've always took with me, whether it was motorcycle clubs or bands. There's always been people there that I could go to, talk to, or ask for help if needed. And I think having that like trusted confidant goes a super long way. And
Yeah.
then we were saying like before, just like learning new tools so that like learning from each experience, instead of getting bogged down and stuck in the negative, wondering, what did I learn from this negative experience and how can I take it moving
Mhm.
forward? Because stuff like that is what pushed me to where I am today. But, I went through a bunch of rough stuff, a lot of it self-inflicted. But I learned from it, and I think that's made me a stronger person. So I think that's always super helpful. And then for
Yeah.
kids, if it was telling parents for kids, pro-social activities, man, getting kids into sports or any sort of like organized activity, martial arts, or even
Mhm.
hobbies, whatever it is, because they're going to meet peers that have the same type of interest and stuff, so they're most likely to meet more positive peers, people that have other
Mhm.
stuff going on. B, the biggest part with being a kid is spending your time doing something right. So if we're not finding something structured for them to do, they're going to find something to do.
Yeah.
So I think that getting involved in sports or any sort of pro-social activities has always been kind of one of my biggest messages for sure.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Another
For
that's
sure.
another opportunity to praise jujitsu is, I mean, from my own kids being in it, it helps so much with self-esteem. And it's a great outlet to get a lot of that frustration and that stuck feeling out. And you're meeting other kids, and the way that it could be intimidating. I mean, bringing your kids into jujitsu, not knowing anything about it, for any of you parents out there that are considering it, I would highly encourage you to do it, because you essentially get your gi and you're in, and you're, going through
Right.
fun exercises. The guys are always interested in the kids. I mean, I think it's an incredibly good, beneficial thing for kids.
And
Um,
I think I grew up wrestling, so I think wrestling or jujitsu are real similar in the fact that they're not team sports. So I
yeah,
mean, points lead towards a team, so everyone still acts as a team, but you can't make excuses. Everything that happens is up to you.
yeah,
I think it's one of those environments where you learn that in order to be successful, you have to put in the work. There's no cheat, there's no shortcut.
mhm,
And so I think you learn those types of lessons in wrestling and jujitsu. I think you realize that even if you're winning, there's always going to be tough moments and tough times that you have to push through if you want to keep going. So I think there's so many cool, valuable lessons you can learn from individual sports like that. So
yeah.
yeah, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, stuff like that. That's amazing.
Accountability is a huge aspect of it as well. And
Absolutely.
one more part to that advice question for kids out there or adults that don't feel like they have a confidant or anyone that they really have for support. Do you have any resources or suggestions that you could make to those folks and how to find someone?
I mean, there's a lot of different hotline sources for like if you're immediately in need of something like for safety reasons. But if you're just going through that thought process and you're trying to think of that, I would definitely say, look for something with shared interests. So jujitsu is one, military veterans have their own, musicians have. So I mean, finding it's just like if you're an AA or NA or anything like that, you have your sponsor, right? So finding
Mhm.
somebody with a shared interest that you could reach out to. I think if it's in the moment, yeah, there's a lot of crisis lines you could call just to make sure you're staying safe. But if you're looking for some long term, I would definitely look forward to like somebody that has a shared interest or someone that has some similarity in your lifestyle, right? Because it's hard to listen to somebody that doesn't understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, great advice. Cool. Thanks,
Justin,
man.
I wanted to
Mm,
ask you this, kind of going back to that transitional part of your life, right? You were with the music. You said you were kind of in a little bit of a, I don't know, a little bit of a crazy state of mind at that point in time of your life, right? How were you able to handle that? Like, what things did you do to kind of make sure you didn't go down a crazier path?
I mean, I did go down some of those paths, but the music helped a lot. When I was in a band, we were practicing almost every day, so I got to see my social group of friends and my friends. And it's really hard to be down in the dumps when you're around people you care about.
Mm,
And when you are, they notice it. So that just staying away from self isolation was a huge piece. So
Yeah.
even when gang stuff, I was always around people, club stuff around people. I'm an identical twin, so I usually had someone around me. So really staying away from that self isolation, I think, played a huge role and always kind of uplifted me and made me feel better.
mm.
Do you miss it? Do you miss walking into a place with that constant respect and the whole do you miss any of that life?
Not really, man, because like I said, I'm grateful that I still have a group of guys, and I think you bring up a good point too. We were talking about it earlier about people that want a title, but
Mm.
people would take positions I had had and then say, "Oh, how come I'm not getting treated like Mooch was treated?" And to me, I've always felt like I was treated the way I'm treated because who I am as a person. So walking into a place and getting respect and the way I carry myself, I don't feel like it's changed at all, whether I had patch or no patch. And I'd like to think that I was the same man with or without it. So,
Yeah.
it's helped me learn that lesson. The stuff I miss is, those days where I'm bored and my friends are working and I'm like, man, before I could have just hopped on my bike and rode to a clubhouse somewhere or something like that, maybe.
Right.
But overall, I don't regret it or miss it. I don't regret doing it either. I had a great time in it, made a lot of really good friends and some fun experiences, but I'm really happy with where I'd moved on to.
That's awesome, man.
It's cool. I imagine respect is earned, and that's definitely present in jujitsu too. That's cool.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
so,
The similarities of jujitsu are so crazy, man. Cause
yeah,
I guess you can
that's,
make that parallel with jujitsu in just about anything, but
Yeah.
yeah. I never thought about it in relation to a motorcycle club. There's a lot of parallels. So I'm curious for moving forward, what are your hopes for the future? What are your plans? Do you have any big plans over the horizon? And do- in relation to your personal and professional career and also your community impact?
Man, not really. I really love what I do for a living right now, so I can't really see doing like a big career change. And as far as like working up the ladder, I don't want to get too far away from working directly with the families. And so, I'm really happy with that. My family life's great. Training a lot still. I got into Kali, like Filipino mixed martial arts or Filipino fighting arts. And that's been really cool. So just staying active has been my biggest thing. I'd like to get back more into lifting weights again. I kind of fell off a little bit. But no major goals, man. I have this book out and I'm hoping that people buy it and check it out. But not for a monetary purpose. I just hope establish new connections, man. I think,
Impact, yeah.
yeah. And from being in a band and then a club and now this, my biggest thing is just meeting new people and networking. And so I'm hoping my book has, kind of does that and has an influence where I can meet other people and who knows where it's going to go. But as far as like any big major goals, man, I'm just kind of chugging along right now.
That's cool.
Cool.
How did you sit down and decide to write a book, man? I mean, that takes a lot of work. I mean, it takes a lot of
It was a lot harder than I thought.
yeah, man. I can imagine. What was that process like for you?
I was probably, I'd left the club. I was probably looking for something to do or fill my time with. And then um, there was a journalist back in Oregon that had covered a lot of my cases every time I'd been arrested. And he was getting into writing. So I was kind of just kind of running the idea off of him. I've read all the biker books there was.
Right,
And
right.
my buddy Dale wrote a really great one called The Hangman. And I was reading that and it really got me
Yeah.
inspired. And I
We
was
we
like,
had him on the show. We had Dale
oh,
Larson
Yeah.
on
awesome.
the show. Yeah, he's a good dude, man.
Dale's the man, dude. And I don't know how our paths didn't cross in the biker world, but they crossed afterwards. And so I'd read his book and I was like, man, I love the way he tells a story. I'd like to do this. And my buddy, that's a author, the journalist, he was like, hey, I think people would really want to hear your story. And so we just kind of started putting it together from there. So
That's awesome, man.
between the two of them kind of motivated me to do it. And then my buddy, Tom DeBlast, that does jujitsu, he had a book out and I'd asked him about the process and he just put me in touch with his publicist. And next thing you know, we ended up getting a book deal. So
How long
same
did it
thing.
take?
Just over a year. It wasn't
Oh,
bad
that's
at
not
all, but
bad. That's not bad.
we were doing stuff almost every day to do it like that.
That's awesome, man. So where can people find you these days? If they want to reach out to you or just follow your journey, where are you on these platforms?
Yeah, Instagram's probably my main one. It's OG__ Mooch. I answer anyone who messages me. So, anyone needs anything, reach out. Obviously I have some boundaries when it comes to that
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I'll always help out where I can. So that's my biggest one. And then there's a link tree on there that has like the link to our weightlifting stuff, to my book, to
Nice.
my jujitsu team, all that stuff.
And we'll link everything to these notes on the podcast, so they just click
Yep.
directly and go to you. So
Awesome.
I'll grab your Linktree stuff and put it in there. I love that part of your inspiration for writing your book was talking to the guy who managed your cases. It's like, I can hear that conversation. Man, just looking at your rap sheet, you ought to write a book.
Right. When you can imagine too, like when I was in the middle of it and he's writing these stories, I didn't even know if I cared for the guy, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't anything personal, but I'm like, who's this guy? He's saying all these negative things to make me look like that. And then we ended up really getting to know each other over the years. And awesome guy, great guy, and ended up helping me a lot with stuff like that. But
That's
it's just
cool.
funny how those things work out,
Yeah,
Yeah.
who'd have all the paperwork? Not you. He's got all the
Right.
paperwork, all the notes, and all the years and dates, man. So that kind of worked out awesome.
What was really cool about that too is, he was an investigative journalist. So that when initially he was going to help me write my book and he just ended up being too busy, but he's the one that made any story I had, you had to have evidence of it and proof of it, and all that stuff. And that went a long way with me because, then when I published my memoir, I wanted to make sure that it was all factual. I mean, obviously people tell
Yeah.
tall tales and things, and you know how memory works. So
Of course.
it's as factual as I can remember, but everything's linked to some sort of evidence. And I think that played a big role too. And I think
Yeah,
that
that's
helped me out
good.
a lot.
It was a great read,
credibility.
Great read, by the way. So
Thank you.
You ready
All
for
right.
the speed round, man?
As
All
ready
right,
as I'm going to be, I guess.
buckle up, buddy. Buckle up, man. It's gonna be harder
All
than
right.
any ride you've ever been on.
I believe it.
All right. 2 minutes on the clock.
All
Let's
right.
go. All right. First question. Best or favorite motorcycle you've ever owned or ridden?
My FXR for sure. 99 FXR3 has been my favorite.
Right on. If your FXR could talk, what would it say about you?
I should probably take it easy on her.
That's awesome.
All right. Best place you've ever ridden and why?
Utah, northern Utah, southern Colorado, just the mountains. That everything right there has just been absolutely beautiful. And then I did that trip. That was on my trip from here to Oregon and back, which was solo by myself. It's probably the longest I've ever spent time by myself. So for that reason
Wow.
alone was amazing. Just the beauty of being down there in that Moab area, incredible.
Right on. Top 3 favorite bands.
Oh man, that's gonna throw me off.
Yeah.
Rancid was an all-time favorite for sure. Blood
Nice.
for Blood, definitely. Man, I don't know. Third one, I change my musical taste all the time. I'm really bad with favorites, man.
Yeah.
Probably,
tough.
All right, with the Clash for sure, because the Clash has been my
Clash.
favorite.
Classic. All right. This is going to be even worse. If you could get on stage and jam with one band, who would it be?
Man, probably the Clash, dude. I mean, I can imagine how awesome that would be. And, those dudes played the biggest role in all of it. I mean,
Absolutely.
Rancid is pretty much just a ripoff of the Clash.
Yep.
And, a lot of bands, come from that. So probably the Clash for sure. That would be really cool.
Right on. All right. If you could time travel backwards or forwards, what era would you go to?
Man, I think it would be awesome to go to the biker years of like Dale's era from that book, that when motorcycle clubs back in the
Yeah.
50s and 60s,
The
early
60s,
70s,
yeah.
where they were all about just riding motorcycles and
Yeah,
partying. They didn't have jobs and they were just on the road with their bros.
Yeah,
Absolutely, hands down, that would be it for sure.
Right on. All right. Favorite motorcycle book of all time outside of Dale's Hangman?
Or your
Yeah.
book.
Or your book, obviously.
Actually, Riding on the Edge. It's a book about the pagans in the 60s, but it's not so much about the club, it's about the guy. And same thing, it's just those old school 1960s motorcycle stories. It's
Nice.
a badass book too.
All right.
That's cool. Okay. Favorite chapter or part of your book that you, while writing that part?
That's a tough one. I think probably that towards the end, just the follow up of why I did it and the wrap up of like where I am and what I want to do moving forward. Just a meaningful piece of it, I think, was probably the most important. I would say the beginning was fun because I got to talk to my mom and my brother, and kind of like the family all played a role in shaping that stuff
That's
up.
cool.
So that was really cool too.
Yeah. That's a pretty cool excuse to reconnect with your family and go through that walk down memory lane.
And we have a big Italian family. We talk all the time. In fact, my mom probably hits me up too much, but at least it gave us something to talk about.
That's awesome.
I'll edit that part out.
Yeah.
One law you would change if you were president to impact the motorcycle community?
Oh man, that's tough. Man, I don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm not really opposed to the helmet law. I grew up in a helmet state, and so I've never had a problem with the helmet law. Now I live in a state that's not required, and a bunch of people don't wear it. I guess I agree with the personal safety aspect or the personal choice aspect, but I just couldn't see how anyone wouldn't want to wear a helmet.
Agreed.
I think lane filtering. I've seen how successful it was in Los Angeles, and I've read the studies on how much safer it is. So probably the lane filtering would be something I would want to see change.
Good call.
Right on. All right, if you could meet and have dinner with one person, past or present, who would it be?
You know what, man? It's tough to say because I've been so grateful that I usually get to meet most of the people that I wanted to meet in some form or another.
That's cool.
So that's a tough one, man. I'm getting ready to meet Mel Chansey pretty soon in person.
Really?
I'm excited for.
Nice.
We talk a lot often, so that's probably one of the ones I'm excited to meet quite a bit. And then he's been tight with John Berthnell and was talking about us maybe meeting, so that'd be cool. I'd love to meet those two guys for sure.
Awesome.
Sweet. This one might be hard. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
When I joined the club, I was told to stay away from politics.
Nice.
But you know what? I mean, it's definitely great advice. But at the end of the day, if you care about something and you're so involved in it, I don't know how you could ignore something like that. Someone's making choices about something that's associated to me, and I don't stand up and voice my opinion. I don't know what kind of member I would have been. So
Right on.
it's kind of a 22, but that definitely would have kept me out of trouble.
Yep.
Gotcha. All right. What's one piece of clothing that you love but your wife can't stand?
Actually, this came up the other day. I have like this, I have a leather shirt from Espinosa's, but it's like a 3/4 like baseball sleeve style leather shirt.
Yeah.
She hates it.
She hates it.
She hates it. She says that nobody likes it.
Does she know that those were big in the 80s?
And so I've been trying to tell her the relevance it is to the biker community, but she does not understand. Does it look like a dork?
That's awesome.
That's awesome. All right. If they made a biker themed movie about you, who would play Justin?
Oh man, good question. Let's say John Berthnell. He seems cool.
Nice. I could see there's a resemblance too, for sure. That'd be cool. What's the silliest superstition you have before or after a ride?
I used to always do when you're driving a car and you're a kid, I'd tap the dash going through a yellow light.
Yeah.
I always did that on my bike too. I'd tap either the dash or the headlight.
Nice.
I don't think I've done it in a while, but that was something I carried with me for a long
Is
time.
that to say,
a
thank
good
God
one.
you made it through safe?
Yeah.
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 For sure, man. For sure.
All right. Besides the One Gang podcast, obviously, what's your other favorite or favorites for podcasts that you listen to?
Man, I don't listen to a ton anymore. Sin Mills TV is still one of my favorites, but it's actually more like one I watch. George Christie's one on Patreon has been really cool because I don't know a lot about that club. So hearing like the old school stories plus the insight, those have been probably my go-to. Sin Mills TV does like a wide variety of people, and it's been really cool. And then I've really been checking out all George Christie's stuff.
That's cool.
Have you listened to Real Ones with John Bernthal?
Yeah, actually that one's awesome. And that just reminds me, there's Bo Berthnell helped put one out, or he's working on one. Bo Bushnell, the dude from Outlaw Archives. What's called Hate and Discontent, I believe. I'm gonna have to look it up. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting because that one's awesome. It's all about Butch Crouch and the Cleveland Hells Angels.
That's cool.
And that one's
Right on.
It's incredible, man. That's probably the deepest stories I've ever seen. I could probably look it up.
Okay,
I'll
gotcha.
send it
I'm
to
gonna
you.
take it. Yeah, I'll take a note, and then we'll try to, if we find that, we'll try to link it in the description.
Because I know he's trying to turn it into a movie or a book or something like that. But it's Butch Crouch's like memoir, or like his own, like he wrote about all this stuff all the time, and then when he passed, his daughter found it
Wow.
and then so she found it, and then she kind of recreated it in this podcast, and it's awesome.
That's
Hey,
awesome.
that's cool.
You got
Yeah,
any
it's really
plan?
bummed me out.
Do you have any plans to write another book at this point?
I don't, man. I mean, my book was about my life, and I don't, until I get some more life experience, I don't
Right,
know what
right.
else I'd write about. I mean, obviously, I could have went in way more detail about the band days or the old punk rock days and stuff like that, but um, at the time, no.
Yeah,
I
I
still am
gotcha.
planning on doing the audio version. The publisher cleared it, wants to do it. We just have to sit down and figure out when we can start recording it.
Are you jamming
Cool.
at all still? You still playing any instruments?
Man, I haven't played the guitar in so long. We did
No
like a reunion show.
way. No
We did a
shit.
reunion show in 2015. Was the first time in probably 10 years I played my guitar, and then shortly after that, I think it's still at my mom's house back in Oregon.
No kidding. No kidding. That's crazy. All right, cool.
Right on. Well, you survived the speed round.
Yeah, man.
Awesome,
You did it.
awesome.
You
Wish
think it.
Thanks, Justin. That was awesome, man. We really appreciate you giving some insight into stuff that maybe you haven't talked about before, and we're excited to follow along with you, man. We appreciate
Yeah,
it.
brother.
Yes,
Thanks so much,
so
man.
much for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
That's great. Great to see the way your life has transpired and now everything that you went through. Now you're helping others. So continue this journey, man. The world needs more people like you. So thanks so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
All right, brother. Take
Appreciate you,
care.
man. Be good.
Bye, guys.